Welcome to Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we discuss Trump 2.0's policies and politics and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. China's Hangzhou-based DeepSeek recently became the most talked about AI startup globally, thanks to its breakthroughs with the R1 and V3 models. This has positioned the company as a serious competitor to OpenAI and other US companies. There are several fascinating aspects to this story. First, DeepSeek was relatively unknown until just 2 weeks ago. Second, its success seems to be built on less advanced chips, in stark contrast to the more powerful hardware used by its American counterparts. Third, its rise is, in part, a result of unintended consequences stemming from US export controls, which were designed to slow down China's AI development. The news sent shockwaves through the tech industry, triggering a stock rally for NVIDIA, which lost $600 billion in value overnight. President Trump called it a wake-up call for American tech companies, but also deemed it a positive development. While the story has been widely covered, there's still so much to unpack and learn from it. So today we're speaking with Kevin Xu, an investor, AI expert, and a China-US relations observer. Well, Kevin and I have known each other right after he graduated from college, and during the Obama administration, Kevin worked in the Department of Commerce and the White House. Then he went off to Stanford and West Coast to be trained as a lawyer and a computer scientist. Spent a few years in the Silicon Valley working in the tech sector, including GitHub and a few other open source companies. Now he's an investor and a new dad. He's fluent in Chinese Mandarin. I'm super excited to have him break down what's really happening behind the headlines of DeepSeek. So welcome, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me, Wenchi.
Well, first of all, can you tell us the fund? What are you focusing on?
Yeah, so my own fund is called Interconnected Capital, and it is a long-only hedge fund. So we invest in the public equity sector. So we don't do VC, actually. We don't do private equity. We don't do early stage. We only do public companies. And the focus actually is on the picks and shovels of the AI economy, as I would like to call them. And picks and shovels can come both in forms of hardware, right, like chips, data center, networking, but also software, which I think is the part that I am really steeped in as my so-called circle of competence. And that's where a lot of our work in terms of investing is focused on, and is also very relevant to AI models and all the stuff that we're discussing today, which is effectively still, software.
Yeah, I mean, these are some of the hottest, I think, sectors, for investors and a lot of people to pay attention to these days. And obviously, we have to start with DeepSeek. Tell us, what your understanding is. Like, why is DeepSeek such a big deal? What are their breakthroughs? And was there any of that a surprise to you?
For anyone who's still catching up or is a little too inundated by all the noise, is that DeepSeek's models are very capable, very affordable, and very open sourced. If there's nothing else to remember from this conversation, is those three elements, right? Very capable in the sense that it is very comparable in terms of performance on sort of all the benchmarks that we all track as AI observers, that just say, never mind the fact that benchmarks can always be gamed, but on the surface, the models are very capable to the best models that have been released so far from both OpenAI and Anthropic. So that's kind of one element in terms of performance. And then the second part is that it's very affordable. So it's very cheap to both train, though we can talk about the nuance of that, and also very cheap to run, which is, I think, the more important thing for the long-term implications. And
well, let's focus on the second part. I think the first part sort of, people feel like, okay, wow, it's, as good as ChatGPT. You can provide your evaluation. But the second part, I think, truly has a huge impact on the global markets, is that is it really as cheap as it claims? Because I've seen different reports how it only costs, $6 million. But I think that was the first shocking effect, right? But in reality, was not. It was just the training run. It actually costs a lot more. So break it down for us.
So it's not just $5.6 million as the paper itself suggested. This is the V3 model paper. I think that cost is solely capturing the single training run that ended up working, that ended up producing the V3 model that we're all kind of digesting right now. There's a lot of cost that goes into, preparing the data ahead of time, failed training run that got to the successful training run. Obviously, all the input in terms of human labor and additional GPU capacity that has to lead up to that point. And so the number itself is a little bit of a cherry pick number. That being said, even with all that, kind of successful training costs added into it, right? Some say it's $500 million, which sounds like a big number. Some people say it's like up to $1 billion, which again sounds like a big-ish number. It's still, relatively speaking, to all the US peers, a significantly cheaper kind of total cost, if you will, to get to a model that, again, is very capable. I did not say it's the most capable, mind you. It's a very capable model with the kind of cost effectiveness, right? That really really blew this thing out of the water for a lot of observers, especially in the West, but also actually in China as well. The shock factor that you mentioned caught people in the West completely by surprise, but I think caught most people in China by surprise as well. And there's only like a few of people who observe this space very closely, myself included, who is less surprised, as you say, about how DeepSeek became what it is today.
Yeah. So tell me, right? So you said you're less surprised, but was it still a surprise to you, or were you more like, well, I knew this day was going to come. It's just a matter of time.
I didn't know when it was going to come. I certainly didn't know the velocity in which the rest of the world gravitated towards that so quickly, right? Because one thing, if you dig into the papers of, again, the V3 model and the R1 model, these are the two most relevant models that we're talking about today. There is a ton of kind of very low-level engineering optimization that led DeepSeek to get to that level of capability and the cost profile that, frankly, it has telegraphed a few months ago in the V2 paper. This is the previous version of the the model, right? Where they kind of talked about a lot of the stuff that they were working on already. They just haven't gone to that performance level yet until basically Christmas when they dropped the V3 model.
Yeah, because I remember seeing some news, even when V2 came out last year, it seemed, obviously experts like you and others who pay attention were pretty impressed by their low cost as well, right?
That's right. That's right.
Yeah. So what is this company, DeepSeek, and its founder? I don't think there's much English material about the company as well as the founder, but maybe you can kind of share with people to the extent that you know about him and the company.
It's a very unique creature. I'm going to use the word idiosyncratic a lot in this conversation because
you like that word. I noticed. Yeah.
It's not just to warm up my dramas or anything. But the origin of DeepSeek actually came out of a quant fund, right, called High Flyer Capital. And you can think of quant fund as any quant fund that you will hear in the United States that has some profile like Renaissance Technology or what have you. Jane Street and all these sort of folks.
And is that the thing in China?
It's not, right? So quant fund as a sort of a subsector of the finance industry has a very kind of a sketchy reputation, let's just say, in China. It's not something that, I guess young, smart, technical graduates aspire to work in, right? In the sense that in the United States, you actually do have a lot of really brilliant engineers from MIT and Harvard and at Stanford or where have you start their career in places like Jane Street and Renaissance because that's where they want to be. In China, there's a very small group of, very well functioning, quant funds and using algorithms, using GPUs, using AI technology, actually. It's just that all they do is model prices in the stock market to make money, right? So that is the origin of DeepSeek. And really, it was spun out officially in 2023, I believe, around May. So a few months after ChatGPT became
That's
well
crazy.
known.
It's not even 2 years old.
It's not even 2 years, right? And the story is that they wanted to raise money just like all the other Chinese AI model companies that also blew up around the same time because of ChatGPT, and they couldn't raise any money because the founder Liang Wenfeng is a bit of an idealist, who's like, I want to create AGI. This is going to be a research lab. We're going to do this AGI thing. There's so much promise there. And then the investor is like, so how are you going to make money? What's your commercialization plan? They're like, we don't have any, right? And that's kind of how the story started, if you will.
So let's just focus on this a little bit, because I've been listening to different sort of Chinese writing about him, right? Saying how he's so successful exactly for the reason that he's less interested in commercialization application like other companies. He's actually very, very focused on innovation, which, according to him, he wants, his company to be a true innovator rather than a follower. Sort of, that's kind of how people think about Chinese companies, even though they're very innovative, but they're less sort of 0 to 1 kind of stage. That tends to be Silicon Valley, and they're extremely good at 2 to 10, right? But he wants his company to be 0 to 1. Do you think that's Yeah.
I think it's something that I think Liang Wenfeng and the DeepSeek team has the ambition to become. I don't think they're there right now, and they will admit it themselves.
That's an important point. They're not there yet.
Yeah, even in the technical papers, it's like, all this stuff that we've done that are innovative or really helped us get to where we are today, they're still by and large based on the transformer architecture for the most part, which is the Google paper that was published in 2017 that led to everything that we have right now. Everything that we use right now is still largely based on the transformer architecture, but they have made some significant improvements and modifications and optimizations on top of that paradigm, which, depending on who you ask, is that 0 to 1 or is that 2 to 10? I think it's debatable, but I do think they have proven themselves that they can really take whatever we have right now as the best in the technology industry to the next level. And perhaps whatever the next huge breakthrough is, you cannot just assume that it's going to come from a US company. Right? It could very much come from a shop like DeepSeek that is, again, very unique, very, very idiosyncratic, and has its own idealism to all this, to be honest, that I think is also making people very either suspicious or impressed, depending on the angle that you come into. Because right now, at least, they have no business model, as far as I can tell. They have no pressure to commercialize anytime soon, and they're just doing their thing, if you will, to get to AGI is kind of the most neutral way to think about it.
His goal is to actually focus solely on being the innovator, sort of the 0 to 1, and he's less interested in becoming other tech giants like Alibaba, Tencent, etc., to do application. And his goal is to make DeepSeek sort of the one that's helping others to do applications, so it can occupy a unique role. I don't think there's any sort of Chinese company yet doing that, right, in the AI space.
That's right. Yeah. There's no Chinese company I'm aware of. There's many Chinese companies who claims that they also want to build AGI, right? But the one that really sort of is walk the walk, if you will, and also have this kind of sense of grandiosity, I think only DeepSeek is really living it. And I will even say, even the United States, most of the companies we talk about on a daily basis are all very heavily commercializing for one reason or another. Frankly, the best analogy to DeepSeek today was OpenAI in 2017, 2018, right? Before they took the giant amount of money from Microsoft.
Yeah, sounds like they're still in a very sort of idealistic kind of stage. But what does that mean, though, for US competitors? Or maybe not competitors, just US AI leaders?
I think it's to be determined, right? We're like literally 2 week-ish into the DeepSeek moment. But I think a few things that I think will happen for sure. One is that all the cost of running the best US AI models will come down. I think the most recent cost profile of OpenAI's O3 model, this is their best reasoning model that just got released a couple of days ago.
So the cost will have to come down. Is it because others are, because they know this costs little, not little, just less to build, and so therefore they will have to lower the cost? Or what are the other factors?
Right. I think there are two factors that goes into this consideration, right? One is that the cost to train a DeepSeek level model, let's just say, is relatively small. Not $6 million small, but still relatively small, that they have to think about what is their own cost structure like when it comes to training their Bexex model. And also because DeepSeek is open source, which means running DeepSeek is theoretically free wherever you want to run it, right? So if you're a closed source model like OpenAI, Google, Anthropic, and you still want to charge people to use your model, you
It's hard
better
to
think about how
justify.
to drive your
Yeah.
costs down too. Because for
Yeah.
the most part, people want to just get the best model for the smallest amount of dollar possible. And DeepSeek has kind of really changed or flipped the script on that one, which again has caused quite a bit of heartburn perhaps in the market and in a lot of people. And we already see that happening, right? The O3 model that I mentioned that just got released a couple of days ago, that API pricing is significantly lower than it probably would have been had DeepSeek not been a thing that we're talking about today.
I think the biggest stock drop in a day in history was Nvidia's. The day after the DeepSeek news came out, because we know that advanced chips are almost the requirement to help run AI models. And so what does that mean? Like, and there's so many rumors about whether DeepSeek used NVIDIA's advanced chips or not. Again, tell us what is really going on.
I think the truth as far as DeepSeek's NVIDIA sort of cluster, right, is that it has a mixture of different models of the Hopper series that is legal, which is the H20. It's temporarily legal, which was the H800. That's the chip that they actually used to train a V3 that was legal for literally 1 year before additional U.S. export control made it illegal. And then probably a little bit of the H100, which is the model of the chip that's always been covered under export control. And there's sort of a lot of either evidence or rumor or what have you that some of that might have been smuggled through different routes into China. Right. But you can sort of assume there's a mixture of the three models, but not too many in all three of the NVIDIA chips. Now, what does that mean for an NVIDIA, the company, is that I think the market reaction is a little bit overblown, right? I think in the short term, people are trying to figure out, does NVIDIA's product, is that necessary to train better models? That's been the thesis up until this moment. And a lot of people are thinking that DeepSeek has shown that you don't need the best NVIDIA product to get there. I don't think that's true. If you ask anybody from DeepSeek, Phone included, he will say that my biggest bottleneck to getting better at what we're doing is
access.
Chips.
Yeah.
That's their chips. Like if I could actually get H100s or Blackwell chips that are coming online without any restriction, I will be the first in line to buy those products. I would not be like, I don't need to spend money on that. I got my, crappy chips over here. That's just fine. That is just not the case.
Yeah. So, okay. So to break this down, first, DeepSeek did have access and did train using NVIDIA's chips. Maybe not all the most advanced chips that were included in the export control policy, but they were able to acquire some of them. It sounds like before the export control policy was enacted. Now, the second question is, do they need all the most advanced chips in order to develop something like DeepSeek, R1 or V3? And if not, training and then seems like inference also is different. And they're actually relying on Huawei's Ascend 910C chip for inference. And so, will there come a day maybe they just don't need that many NVIDIA or US made chips? Maybe Huawei can replace some of that?
I think that is the big $1 trillion question right now. And I'll break it down into a couple of reasons, right? So you talk about training and inference, right? That's been sort of the most general paradigm to understand why certain really powerful chips are necessary to do the training. And then certain less powerful chips can just do the inference, as in literally serving the tokens that give us the message when we chat with ChatGPT or Gemini or what have you. But what is the latest breakthrough in the entire AI model industry is that there's this period of post-training, right? Where you kind of pre-train the model for a little while, and then you keep on training it as it goes along. And that's kind of where the reasoning part of the model comes in. That workload resembles more inference workload than training workload, right? So even chips that are very good at inference but not good at training, a simple way of talking about this, they can still be used in a very useful way to improve the model,
contributing
right?
to the training. And
that comes back to the Huawei question, which I think is a very tricky one, because Huawei's Ascend series has been, evaluated to be on par-ish, let's just say, with the Hopper series, depending on the model and the makeup and what have you. Maybe they're less capable. But if you can access the Huawei chips without any restriction, assuming China can produce enough of them at a decent quality, and you can use that chip to do the post-training inference workload that is still very much training the model to make it get better before you really release it, then that could really flip the script on more the self-sufficiency dimension of China's own AI industry that is very unique. Though I think the rest of the world will still be very happy to buy NVIDIA chips or AMD chips for that matter, if they can get their hands on that, as opposed to trying to get Huawei chips, which I think is still in the process of, frankly, satisfying its own country's demand, let alone exporting it out, which is sort of a much farther along thing to talk about.
The Biden administration actually had a very comprehensive, I would say, chip control, export control policy. And the goal was exactly that, right? They wanted to slow down. They know that it's impossible to kind of just completely stifle China's advancement when it comes to chips. But however, slowing down, is repeatedly set as sort of the objective. And now with DeepSeek and Huawei chips and, all these surprising news, what does that say about U.S. government export control policy? Some even would go further to say, because of export control policies, you kind of force Chinese companies to be faster, more innovative in order to survive.
I think it's a tricky question, right? I do believe that if the United States strategic vision or strategic goal towards China when it comes to tech competition is still to prevent China from advancing faster than it was, and then export control is the way to do it, right? Like, if you don't think that's a strategic prerogative, then we can talk about the different policies. But given that that is still currently our strategic posture, export control, given all its issues and whatnot, was still generally, I would say, very effective in keeping all the Chinese labs, DeepSeek included, from advancing even further. But I don't think anyone should have any illusion that the moment you put up some kind of export control wall, all the engineers in China will just go home and lie flat, right? That is clearly not going to be the rational response to, frankly, any country, let alone China. And they're just going to keep digging further, using their ingenuity and their learning and maybe their creativity to find a way to get there, because they're going to try to get there. And the question is not to prevent the behavior, but only to say, given that the behavior is going to persist, what else can we do about it, if anything?
So what else can we do about it? And it's very unclear. I don't know. Maybe you have better information what Trump administration's policy may look like.
I think there's very active conversation being chat about that. The current export control, where the lines are drawn as far as like what is legal, what is not legal, is still not wide enough. I think there is a real chance that, say, the H20 Hopper chips that I referenced, where DeepSeek and any Chinese company can still buy today legally, may become export controlled further into the future, right? Because of DeepSeek, quite frankly, right? And so will be just less and less business for NVIDIA in China. But of course, the logical kind of conclusion with that is that Huawei will fill the void, right? And then we'll just have a even more decoupled situation than we currently have. And
but if you see, I'm going to challenge that. I think that is what probably a lot of officials would agree. But if you look at Trump's immediate reaction to the news about DeepSeek, he didn't seem that upset or frustrated.
Right.
Or like, feel like, oh my God, we need to, tighten the controls. He seemed to think it's a good development because it helps competition and it will lower the cost. So would he, as someone who's so unpredictable, would he actually flip the plot and just say, forget about it. It's Biden administration's policy. We're not going to do it because it's not going to work. And also, I think in his DNA, he's a business person.
Right. Right. No, I think that's a very fair challenge. And it's not like any of us would know what the president is thinking or want to do right now.
What did you think Jensen Huang and he talk about?
Right. I think that's a very fair question, right? Like, I think Jensen has never met the president before, as far as I know. So this is like their first introductory meeting.
Yes. He didn't go to his inauguration.
He didn't even, actually, it's funny that instead of going to the Trump's inauguration, like every
went to Taiwan.
He's in Taiwan.
Yes.
He then went to mainland China to celebrate Chinese New Year with his employees there, right? So you can kind of see where Jensen's priority really lies as far as like his scheduling is concerned, right? And I think it could be a big sort of blind spot for NVIDIA if they don't continue to work that relationship, I guess, because it is a very relationship-based business setting with our current president. And, I think to your point about export control, could it be blown off? I actually find Trump's message somewhat reassuring in the sense that there's only so much our policy can do to keep China behind. Yeah. I don't think we should get rid of all the export control at all. I think to the extent that we have the policy tools to do so, we should use them, but we shouldn't assume that is the only thing we should do. And that will solve all of our problems, right? And I think DeepSeek lighting a bit of a fire under all the American companies' asses is not necessarily a bad thing either. And I think that's being played out kind of as we speak. And that was kind of Trump's message when he was talking about it. He's like, this is what is it? What is he called? Like a call to arms or like a warning sign to all of our companies. So we're going to get ourselves together, right?
He said it's a wake up call.
Wake up call. That's right. A wake up call. Right.
Yeah. When export control policies were issued a couple of years ago, several companies have warned that, including, SML, which, obviously was the most important EUV machine manufacturer. And a few days ago, I think I saw the news that somehow Chinese also have developed the EUV technology. I don't know if it's a sort of on par with ASML's capability yet, but, it sounds like it's some breakthrough. So, one day, I think both of us know, Chinese will just have the capability to do everything on their own. I think that's their goal as well.
Yeah, I think, that's a strategic level question, right? That's not an export control work or not work question. I think if I were to, carve out these policies and have the power to do so for a day, I would certainly like to keep some level of dependency between the U.S. and China, if only for the purpose of, having some leverage in the relationship and kind of vice versa, right?
Interesting.
Yeah. And because right now, that comes back to this whole DeepSeek moment, why everyone's so surprised, where did this all come from? Part of decoupling is also just lack of information about the other side, right? Like, people rely on very poor sources for the most part to understand China these days. And if you continue on that path, you're going to be surprised all the time.
I know.
Right? But you shouldn't be surprised if you actually spend time there or just have a dialogue going. And a lot of the dialogue comes from business relationships, right? That you can kind of keep tabs on each other, if you will, but also you make money off of each other. And I think that's a fair way to kind of conduct business. I don't think we should open up everything like we were before, but I also don't think completely cutting off makes any sort of strategic sense, let's just say.
Yeah, I've seen that, and part of my worry is that if the Americans actually don't have access to some of the more advanced developments from China, whether it's software, whether it's hardware, whether it's other products, you literally don't know how advanced a lot of the Chinese companies have become. And so, you would just constantly have that shocking effect, like the EVs, like the DeepSeek moments, except that the frequency may grow over time. It seems like developing AI requires so much energy, and we see all these companies from Meta to the Stargate initiative. Everyone is building up data centers here and there. Energy consumption is going to go off the roof. What does that mean for the energy world and the climate world?
I think the climate world is going to be challenged quite a bit, unless you believe that nuclear energy is a perfectly good climate friendly source of energy, which I think a lot of people do believe. I think China believes that, and I think the United States is starting to believe that. I think that's generally probably a good thing. China actually has probably the most advanced nuclear power generation technology period of anybody in the world right now, is also generating a lot of nuclear power. From a consumption perspective, I think it's going to be very energy hungry for a very long time, right? When we're talking about inference before just now, inference is no longer just to serve up the answers. It's also to keep training the model, keep the model thinking, reasoning. Every single token that is being generated in that post-training inferency type time or that period is just going to constantly consume energy, right? Like right now, if you play with these reasoning model, especially the DeepSeek one, which actually kind of tells you, it gives you the internal dialogue of what it's thinking before it gives you the answer. Every single word is in energy or of an ion or a unit of energy being produced, right? So a reasoning model is actually pretty energy intensive. And that is the paradigm where the entire model industry is moving towards. So I think the energy hungriness of AI will just continue for a very long time. How can we navigate that so we don't temporarily disrupt normal people's lives? I think there are cases now in the United States already where,
Yeah.
certain metropolitan region in the Southeast, especially where I live, where all the data centers are being built, are getting disrupted on a daily basis because the grid energy is being diverted to the new data center, right? And the solution may not be to stop building AI, but certainly we have to bring enough capacity online first before we prioritize training AI for, letting people heat their houses, right?
Exactly. I mean, that's a huge question, right? I think wasn't Zuckerberg, when he announced that Meta was going to have a $60 billion investment in building data centers, and he proudly showed the map as big as almost like the entire Manhattan. And it's just one company. How much will go towards AI development rather than just usual consumption? I mean, I'm sure I want to believe that Trump administration is thinking about this in terms of energy policy, but it feels like it may go back to fossil fuel kind of energy even more.
That's right. I think the short-term solution to all this is essentially drill, baby, drill, right?
Mhm.
And I think that is also the administration's policy. And the whole AI build-out almost lends more credence to the necessity of drilling more fossil fuel out of our own ground to fuel this for the most part. Some people even talking about coal, right, which is a very dirty form of energy, but we certainly have them here in the United States. And then hopefully we transition to a more long-term sustainable, cleaner energy. But I do think in the short term, we are going to probably live with like slightly dirtier energy for the sake of, having your ChatGPT answer your questions a little bit quicker.
Well, I'm sure a lot of climate advocates aren't happy to hear about this. But there's another interesting aspect of this I just want to share here. So I interviewed Dr. Jianming Hu, who's the FinFech innovator. Um, and he actually had a more optimistic view. He was saying, obviously we're all very focused on the growing energy consumption needs right now, but, um, the energy that's required to power innovation will lead to the reduction of energy consumption because of the ensuing innovations themselves, right? So I thought that's really interesting because imagine, right, all the EVs, no longer need to run on fossil fuels, but just cleaner energy. And if AI's development helps enable innovations like that, perhaps in the longer term, we will actually reduce energy consumption. Obviously, I have no idea how long that's going to take and whether that's going to be become a reality or not. But that seems to be a more optimistic view
Yeah,
about
and
energy.
I share the optimism as well. Like I can't comment on all the other elements of energy policy, but certainly in the specific world of AI alone, where I spent a lot of time on, right? Right now, the biggest cost to an AI application being as costly as it may be is basically the energy that leads into the training and inferencing of the output and the hardware that you have to buy to serve that output, right? But that cost has already gone down dramatically in 2-3 orders of magnitude since ChatGPT was released a little over 2 years ago, right? So if you look at that not even long term, like a 2-year trajectory, that's where we're all spending our time thinking about is how to reduce kind of the per watt token cost, right?
Yes.
Is literally what we're optimizing for every day. And part of that is producing more energy, so energy doesn't become as scarce as it used to be. And part of that is better use our current energy footprint what we have. And that goes into cooling technology, that goes into, there's a lot of innovation on that front, right? It used to be all air cooled. Now we're stepping into liquid cooling world. There are different variations of liquid cooling that's supposed to be more efficient for energy consumption. So people are working on it for sure, and people know that's the problem or the bottleneck. And I am optimistic that we will get to a place where we don't have to trade off between heating our houses and playing with our AI app.
Yeah, I do hope that it brings more innovations in order for us to live in a newer way. Now, we have to talk about open source versus closed source. I know that's a passion of yours. I still remember when you were like talking about it and a couple years ago, and I had like zero clue what you were talking about. What's he talking about open source? Now it's one of the hobbits. So tell us why you have been such a long-term champion for open source.
I think open source, the easiest to understand it, is a way to develop technology completely in the open for free, right? And it is a very powerful democratizing force to make technology more available to the most number of people around the world. It's actually also the most secure way to develop technology, which is a bit
On that point, just explain that,
yeah.
because some people don't believe that is a way to protect your intellectual property, innovation, etc. But you don't think so.
Yeah, I'll take that on two levels, right? One is pure security, like cybersecurity, right? Basically, all bugs are shallow when it's all in the open. Is kind of how you want to think about it, right? If you have the world's best kind of brightest mind being able to access your source code immediately, no one wants to run buggy code. They're gonna run it. They're gonna find bugs on it. They're gonna root out bugs and security vulnerabilities as quickly as they surface, essentially, compared to the closed source development model, where essentially you're locked up in a room somewhere in a company or in a lab, and you can't tell anybody, what you're working on, right? So from a security perspective, and this is actually proven out in where we live with everything that we use, right? Android is a open source technology. Linux, which is the operating system that's kind of the godfather of open source, software, runs pretty much all the data centers and all the servers in the entire world. And the code is open. It's just right there, right? But everyone can pull it down. Everyone can fix the bugs. Everyone can improve it further. It's a much better, though a little bit of a slower way, I would argue, to develop technology. Right now, let's come back to the IP question, right? That is a little bit trickier. I think there's still a part of the world that believes code itself is valuable. And if there's anything that DeepSeek has shown is that the code itself is probably not that valuable in the form of a model, right? The fact that it was willing to completely open source the model, everyone can download it for free, everyone can modify it for free, everyone can distribute the modification for free without even have to tell DeepSeek, is a very powerful paradigm that has driven the technology innovation in other parts of the stack for a very long time. And that just shows you that DeepSeek can be perfectly fine without making like a single cent from the model itself. And that's actually how it has happened in a lot of layers of technology when it comes to databases. We mentioned operating systems and all sorts of stuff, right? So that is, again, not everybody believes that. It's not just a belief of mine. I've observed how that has happened over time, right, as we adopt technology. And I think the democratizing force is probably the most important thing that also goes into soft power when it comes to countries as well, which is another newer element that is kind of just coming onto the scene.
Yeah, this is all fascinating and almost contradictory in some way, right? Because DeepSeek is built on open source model. And you can say that it benefits from the open source model because of its limited access to some of the, just chips and other, advanced tools that it may have. However, for those of us and many others who have tested DeepSeek intentionally to see, its framework, especially when it comes to censorship and, sensitive topics, then DeepSeek doesn't seem to be the best place to get those answers. I mean, I'm not technical enough to understand if that affects its algorithm and, output thinking, etc. But what does that mean? Like, just help us kind of like in a layman's way of understanding how can you have censorship on one hand, but advocating for a very open source kind of modeling.
It is a dichotomy, and the way I think about it, and I've done a lot of these tests myself as well. I will like download these open source models onto my laptop and ask the questions and whatnot. The way to understand these models is that whether it's a model from China, the US, France, where have you, it is all trained on more or less the same base data, which is the collective knowledge of the internet, which means the model, quote unquote, already knows everything as a starter when it was born. Right now, because of where these models do come from, certain facts, certain parts of history get tuned out. Right, they get tuned out for censorship reasons, compliance reasons. Right now, what's interesting about open source model is that you can tune it back in if you want to. Right, you can actually untune a lot of these things that get censored. Because it's open source, you can grab a version of it and just play with it yourself, right? Like untuning a model is in a form a derivative of the model that you can just then deploy.
Wait. So you're saying, let's say for someone like you who actually know how to do it, even though you're using a DeepSeek model, it's almost like a VPN. You can do it yourself in order to get over that firewall. Is that right?
In a sense, right?
Okay.
And then there are kind of like a couple of ways for a model to be censored, right? One is that you tune out the knowledge that it knows, right? You just teach it not to respond, essentially. And another way is that you also can block it in the cloud layer. So when you download a DeepSeek app from your app store, that is hosted somewhere in the cloud, probably in DeepSeek's data center. So when you talk to that version of DeepSeek, it's going to be more censored than if I download that model raw onto my laptop and play with it myself. Right.
Interesting.
And the reason why this is interesting for open source is that if you're closed source model, you can't even do that level of verification. Right. I cannot today download a raw version of Claude or Gemini onto my laptop and like fool around with it, if you will, right? And you can jailbreak it. There are all these funny examples on the internet of like how to jailbreak DeepSeek models, the open source one, to tell it thing it's not supposed to tell you by like replacing the letter O with the number 0, and it starts to tell you everything. which is hilarious, on all sorts of topics that you would never consider a Chinese model to be able to talk about, right?
Yeah.
But that's just the fun thing about technology. But again, all this is made possible because it is open sourced. And it's not to say that DeepSeek's model is like more democratic or whatever, but I think we're using the word democratic in two different ways now, right? I think democratizing the access to technology is how I would characterize open source, in a way that a random engineer in Africa who has enough internet bandwidth can do exactly what I just did with DeepSeek model.
Right.
But you cannot do that with any of the closed source model. And that's why Llama is so important too. I think DeepSeek is possible because of Llama. Right? I think DeepSeek actually validates Meta's open source AI strategy in a lot of ways. And then they're kind of reinforcing each other in an open world, while OpenAI and others kind of have to wrestle with what they want to do with the closed world that they occupy.
Fascinating. I mean, sorry, it just gets me thinking so many more questions. And actually, when you use Africa as an example, so that's my next question, right? With open source, if we're democratizing AI technologies, are we going to be able to see more countries developing their own sort of AI infrastructure and framework, or the so-called sovereign AI, or, which was my worry before, if the resources and the talent are just purely concentrated in a small number of countries like US and China, what does that mean for other countries?
Yeah, I think talent is obviously much less transferable.
Mm-hmm.
But code is basically borderless, right? And the other element to open source is that it's actually very good for technical education, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's why every single university lab or CS program all uses open source code, not just because they're cheap or they don't want to pay for the proprietary stuff, because you can actually teach students how this works, right? Mm-hmm. You can be like, here's how the code actually flows, and this is where the bug could happen, and you can change it this way and it becomes something else, right? So from an educational perspective, open source is just better, period, right? But from a sovereign AI perspective, that's a little bit tricky. I think a lot of countries are already, building their own sovereign AI infrastructure. Probably 20 plus countries by my
What
count.
does that involve? What does that entail? Right. Tell us.
And that is, in my assessment, a redundancy of AI infrastructure. Think of like a mini Stargate for every single country that wants to have a sovereign AI in their own physical domain. Right? So
like data centers,
a bunch of NVIDIA GPUs probably, and then these are like the raw data center build out, right? And then what do you do with it? I think it's an interesting question, right? Like once a country has it, because it's not a competition with other startups, right? It's sort of like you want to have your own redundancy plan because this AI thing is so important and strategically valuable probably. And perhaps you want to enforce your own data residency and compliance structure, which you cannot do really if your government doesn't kind of have jurisdiction over the data center, right? Which is where everything lives physically, right? So that's probably another reason why they want to do that. But again, it's an open question if it's actually good money spent or not, but we'll see.
Yeah, I think it really depends on how much of a priority, or if you have the competitiveness almost as a country to spend that kind of money investing in this kind of infrastructure. Well, we're coming to the end. We have to talk about, what all these developments mean for US-China competition, one of our favorite topics. So other than DeepSeek, I don't want people to continue to be surprised. Are there other Chinese companies to watch in the AI space?
I think there has been a lot, but I think even within the Chinese AI ecosystem, DeepSeek came out of nowhere for people who are in that ecosystem. So for anyone who's in the West,
because all the big giants, like they're all doing AI, right?
Every single, Alibaba, Tencent, Baidu, ByteDance, Kuaishou, everyone that you have heard of, they have their own model team, right? And you have a bunch of startups as well. Zhipu, Minimax,
Mm-hmm.
what have you. I think 01 AI, they're still around. I think they're rumored that they might get bought by Alibaba. We'll see. But I think there's a corporate startups as well, right? I think there is a process of consolidation within the Chinese AI ecosystem, just as we've had in the Silicon Valley ecosystem. It's just maybe like 6 to 1 year behind the process of consolidation. But a few companies I will call out as companies that could continue to be on the frontier, right? One is Alibaba. They also released a very powerful model very recently in the midst of the DeepSeek, attention grabbing called a Qwen Max. They have their own reasoning model as well. ByteDance's Doubao model is very good, very powerful, also very, very cheap to run as well. So ByteDance is really driving the cost curve down as well. And another company that may not be on a lot of people's radar in terms of AI that I want to call out is Xiaomi. Xiaomi is really pushing forward with its own AI ambition. In fact, it has poached some of the key talent from DeepSeek to run its AI.
I read about a young woman, Luo Fuli, right, who developed DeepSeek,
right? And I think there was a more senior person who used to lead the engineering team. They're all kind of like getting poached over to Lei Jun's ecosystem, Xiaomi, right? And why is Xiaomi important is because Xiaomi's hardware actually has pretty deep penetration, not just in China, but in a lot of
other countries. Yes.
Smartphone, smart devices
EVs,
at home, and now the EVs, right? Their EVs actually are getting very good accolades.
Yes.
And if you think about Xiaomi becoming the next EV behemoth, and the diffusion opportunity, the distribution opportunity of a Xiaomi model to all of these devices, I think is going to be a very interesting one to watch as well. That may not be on as many people's radar.
Yeah. I mean, I really wish there could be more, media coverage, and I mean English media coverage about all these companies doing just really, really fascinating work. What about, we didn't talk about Kai-Fu Lee's AI company. What do you think about it?
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned it in passing, right? 01 AI, and they've also been very at the forefront. I'm sorry, in the open source AI direction. They've been open sourcing from day one, and they very much grok kind of the open source power of putting a model out there, getting feedback, getting improvement, and then just building applications on top of that in a much more cost-effective way. Right.
Yeah.
So I think it's still one to watch. They have a very close partnership with Alibaba, almost akin to OpenAI with Microsoft, or Anthropic with AWS. So there is that I think relationship going on. It actually it's sort of a mixed bag for me, whether that's good or bad for the startup. But that is sort of the ecosystem where 01 operates, and I think that they're still doing their thing.
Yeah, I mean, it makes sense, right? For resource sharing and also just efficiency and tapping into each other's different platforms. So so then, who do you think will reach AGI first? Would it be a Chinese company or an American company?
I have no idea. I mean, most people don't even know what AGI stands for, right? Or ASI is another one that people are starting to use now to get themselves out of the AGI moniker.
So
right?
What is ASI?
Artificial super intelligence.
Yeah.
As opposed to artificial general intelligence, artificial super intelligence, right?
What does that mean, though?
I think that is something that I believe the Anthropic team has been evangelizing a lot more, which is basically an AI that could do really bleeding edge scientific discoveries, kind of how I think about it, right? Like even better than
medical, biotech,
medical, bio, anything that's at the forefront of scientific discovery. Like think of it as like a really strong, like a principal investigator team with a bunch of crack postdoc, but in the form of an AI model that can now do discovery even better than perhaps the best in the field, right? Like think of it as like a Nobel Prize winning team in the form of a model, right? That is like an ASI, I suppose, is the way I at least think about it. And I think, we could get there in the next couple of years or so with a model that has that level of capability. Does that mean like the world ends? I don't think so. Does that even mean like, whichever country gets there first wins or loses? I also don't think so. But it's the kind of thing that people like to talk about, so we talk about it.
Yeah. No. It's a really good question, right? Because they are at the frontier of sort of the human development. And so does it matter as much who gets there first? It's a very legit and very important question. And so how much, I mean, I think this comes back to how can we support, whether it's American AI companies, further advancement, lowering the cost, being more efficient, etc. How much does the government policy have a role in this? For example, if you look at, Chinese AI companies, do we know how much has the Chinese government in terms of lending their support, whether it's policy, or the ecosystem building? How much has gone to that, or is just purely private sector?
I think on the AI front, broadly speaking, the Chinese government has been leaning in with its resources and I guess just say like, approval for many years now in the forms of robotics, manufacturing, drones even. These are kind of the boring AI applications pre-ChatGPT, right? That we no longer talk about, but they're still very much artificial intelligence powered, right? When it comes to frontier model development, when it comes to AGI, the race to AGI or ASI, based on my current observation, the government has been relatively neutral towards it. And DeepSeek is a very good example of succeeding in spite of the government, not because of it. What does that mean for their future? I don't know. Like, I think everyone now has seen pictures of, Liang Wenfeng meeting Premier Li Qiang and what do they talk about and all that sort of stuff, right? Like, presumably, Liang Wenfeng will complain about lack access to chips. He wants to be able to access more chips, among other things that they discuss behind closed doors. But I think what is important for people to understand that DeepSeek, again, is an idiosyncrasy. It is not a product of government policy. Could it be wrapped in the government program in the future because now it's becoming so prominent? We will see. But at least up to this point, it sort of existed on its own island, and that is the magic of DeepSeek. Will it remain comfortably on its own island is the big question, right?
Yeah, it is a huge question.
Yeah.
And do you see the two countries collaborate on AI development one day?
I don't think so. Maybe like one day into the distant future, there could be.
I think they tried 10 years ago. I think there was some effort, right? But not anymore. Yeah.
Right. Like if you talk about collaboration in the lowercase sense, every single US company is reading DeepSeek paper to replicate, to learn from it. And then maybe they'll open source some of that learning as well. And then whoever in the Chinese tech ecosystem can leverage that as well. That's a reasonably healthy way to think about collaboration, right? Again, all in open source. But from a government to government perspective, I don't see that happening. And I think if there is some like basic communication on the governance side, right? I think one thing that the Biden administration did in its waning days in the Lima G20 summit, I believe, is they had a proclamation with the Chinese leadership that they will promise to never they will promise to always have a human in the loop when it comes to launching nuclear weapons. I think that's pretty good to have some understanding between these two countries and every single country out there, right? That's the level of kind of collaboration, if you will, that is at the bare minimum what we should do. But as far as like advancing or pushing towards the frontier, I do think there's a bit of a parallel path, again, kept together by open source.
Yeah. I think in the past, even during the Cold War era, US and Russia still collaborated on whether it's space exploration or some other fronts, even though they're also competitors, right? So that is an interesting question. Well, with that, I wanted to thank you so much, Kevin, for sharing us your rich knowledge and also just observation and analysis of all these complicated questions, but probably the most important ones we're facing today. And hopefully we'll see more of your writing and speaking and sharing in the future.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Wenchi.
DeepSeek presents a Sputnik moment for Silicon Valley. This perception may have been somewhat overblown due to limited understanding and access to information about China. Recorded on February 3rd, we spoke with Kevin Xu of Interconnected Capital about several headline-grabbing topics, including DeepSeek, AI, semiconductors, energy, and the ongoing US-China tech competition. On January 28th, Trump announced his intention to impose tariffs on semiconductors. While details remain undisclosed, it is widely anticipated that legacy chips, primarily manufactured by companies in Taiwan, China, and South Korea, will be affected. Meanwhile, as promised, Trump's additional 10% tariffs on all Chinese goods took effect this week. In response, China announced retaliatory tariffs on coal, LNG, oil, agricultural machinery, and automobiles, set to take effect on February 10th. Additionally, China has launched antitrust investigations into US companies such as Google and Nvidia, and it's reportedly considering a new probe against Intel as part of its response to US trade measures. A planned phone call between China's President Xi Jinping and Trump did not take place on February 4th, raising speculation about whether the two sides will be able to negotiate a deal before China's tariffs are implemented. This is Perspectives with Wenchi Yu, where we analyze the policies and politics under Trump 2.0 and their implications for Asia, China, Taiwan, and beyond. Thank you for watching and listening to our second episode. We value your feedback. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel and podcast. See you next week.